Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Stephen Fleming, and delighted to have Bill Thompson here this evening to talk about the Make It Digital project and various challenges and successes along the way. Bill's a great friend of the museum, and we're delighted to have him here. Very honoured. Bill is a technology journalist, I'm sure as you all know, working freelance, but often to be heard on the BBC. And you'll have seen his articles in BBC News Online and on BBC World Service Click. You'll have heard him, I wouldn't doubt. He was born in Newcastle upon Tyne, but actually was brought up not a million miles from here in Corby. He moved from Corby just as the steelworks were about to collapse, I think.
The two weren't related.
I was just going to say that. And he went to Cambridge University. That was in 1979. Now, the curious thing is that David Allen, who's behind the camera tonight here, first heard of BBC's developments into technology through the computer literacy programme in 1979. Bill went to Cambridge, read philosophy, graduated in 1982 when the BBC BBC Computer Literacy series started on television and the BBC Micro started to happen. So a nice bit of timing there. Bill went to work with, his first computer experience was with an Acorn Atom in 1981, and a few years later he was inspired to take a graduate computer science course.
Technology journalist with a degree in computing, it's unheard of.
He claims to have been inducted into the computing mafia through his work on Unix systems in Cambridge, so be very careful of any offers he makes you. By the late 80s, he was well into his journalism career, writing for Computing and for the Computer Guardian, and then in the 90s realised what was happening with online, with the web, and the internet. So he headed up the Guardian's new media lab and oversaw the launch of the Guardian newspaper website, one that's very highly regarded to this day. For the past 7 or 8 years he's been working with the BBC first from archive development projects and now as head of partnership development of Make It Digital. And amongst other things he's been involved in getting the archive Alistair Cook's letter from America online. So Bill sees digital technology as a liberating and challenging force for good, even in these days of fake news. Thank you very much, Bill.
Well, that's a very lovely introduction, thank you. I'll try to be loud enough, I'll try to be entertaining enough. I did first use a computer back in 1981. In fact, I did philosophy for 2 years and then I did experimental psychology. And in my final year at university, I ran an experiment about can pigeons learn through observation, and was taken up to the top floor of the psychology lab in Cambridge, a building fans of zombie movies will know because the initial scene of 28 Days Later starts there. And I like to point out to my children that's also the place I met my wife, their mother. The two are not directly related. And I was taken to the top floor and said, okay, so here are the computers. They're connected up in this experimental thing called EcoNet. You use a language called Online Basic, and you just have to code the experiment. That was it. That was the induction. Because it wasn't supposed to be complicated. It wasn't like this was this magical world to which you had to be introduced. It was, you are a remote, fairly clever person who understands science. Of course you can program, just read the manual and do the job. And that was also how the internet was first presented to me. I was working, in fact, at Acorn Computers, one of my second job in computing. And it was like, oh yeah, we've got access to the internet as well, so you can send emails and copy files around, that's fine. And it wasn't like, Bill, you're not going to believe this. We're one of the few companies in the world that has that. It was like, yeah, that's what they do. What are computers supposed to do? They're supposed to move files around. What does this do? It moves files around. Trivial. And because it was never special, I think I got a good insight into the ways in which access to this sort of technology influences people at quite a deep level and shifts the assumptions you make about the things that are possible, the scope of your life, what Stephen Johnson calls the adjacent possible, the things that it is easy to imagine even if they are not current, shifts because of access to this technology. And in the intervening 30 years, which have gone by in a wink of an eye and have not changed me physically in the slightest, in those intervening 30 years, I've seen how electronic systems, I don't like the word digital anymore, it's a word without meaning, electronic systems have transformed the range of possibilities for everyone in the world, even those who never touch them. The lives of people living a subsistence, peasant existence, farming in Costa Rica have been transformed by the internet because it has shaped the world economy, the choices that are available to them, even if they never pick up a smartphone. And once they do pick up a smartphone, as more and more of them are doing, then there is an even greater step change in the possibilities in their lives. So I've watched this happen. I've had a part to play in it, and I have to confess that I'm sorry, but I killed the newspaper industry. I'm the person at The Guardian who persuaded Alan Rusbridge, the then editor, and the Scott Trust that it needed to be freely available online, and therefore made it absolutely impossible for there to be a viable financial model for newspapers since. It seemed like a good idea at the time. It seemed like the obvious thing to do. You know? I told them the money will come eventually. I think they thought 5 years, not 50, but you know. Simple order of magnitude mistake. We've all made them, haven't we? One bit out and that's it. It all goes to pot. That being said, I've watched the technologies that I've had a small part in shaping and making it available to people, change everything. And 8 years ago now, I was living the life of the freelance, quite happy. I had some consultancy, I had some journalism, I had some radio, bits and pieces. I was in charge of my own life. And a guy called Roly Keating, who was at the time director of archive content at the BBC. And I once told him that the only words I really didn't like in his job title were the words director, archive and content. Or you could keep of. And a guy called Tony Aggie, who used to glory in the job title at the BBC of controller internet. Make of that word. But was there at that time controller of archive development, asked me if I'd come on board for 6 months to sort out partnerships with the BBC Archive. That was in 2009. After 6 months, it became clear this was a bigger job than you might imagine, partly because the BBC has a habit of seeing partnerships as things you do to people, not things you do with them. And so there was a little bit of sort of course correction needed. And also because the BBC saw its archive as being so incredibly precious that nobody should be allowed even to know it existed. That to index it was somehow to break a sacred bond of trust between the programme makers who really liked their precious material collecting dust on a shelf and the audiences who wanted something shiny and new tonight and didn't care about the past. I overstate, but only a little bit. There was a big problem within the BBC about how it thought about the materials that it had collected. It kept them safely, did a good job of preservation, but was not really willing or interested in sharing, because the perspective of the BBC as a broadcaster is it's about the next thing. It's about what's on TV tonight. It's about the BAFTAs will win in 6 months' time. It's about those sorts of things. So constantly moving forward, like a particularly large shark. I thought it was necessary to change that, and working with some great colleagues, a couple of people in this room, we managed to do a lot of work, firstly, to shift the perspective, to make people realise the archive was something of cultural value, that it counted in its own right, not just as the record of the BBC's activities, and also that if people didn't know what was in it, they couldn't give you money to buy it, so let's index it properly. So one of the projects we did is called Genome, and if you go to Genome on the BBC website, you will find we digitised, well, we scanned, digitised, indexed, tagged the entire contents of Radio Times from 1923 onwards, and you can now go and find out which programme was on the day you were born, which is what everybody does first time they do it. Guaranteed. If I hadn't told you you're going to do it, you'd have done it. Now you will think, I'm not going to do it, but you'll still do it. Watch. And these fine people stand up. Did an enormous amount of job work building that very system. And what that does is it makes it possible to say, well, the BBC's got this or it hasn't got this. I say this because that is part of the BBC's broader mission. And I'm going to quote something for you now from a very important document. And this document defines the BBC as an agent of change. It says, we deem it desirable that the services of the BBC should be developed and exploited to the best advantage and in the national interest. Okay, that comes from the 1926 Charter. That's the foundation document in the original BBC. It was referring to what they called wireless telegraphy for receiving broadcast programmes. Very precise. But of course, it talked about the technology and the best advantage and the national interest. And if you think about the BBC in those terms, as an agent for social change, that has been given this mission in society to use the technology to the best advantage, as the technology changes, the things you can do with it change. So just as I learned about computing, as you could do this stuff with it, just as the idea of the adjacent possible, the things that could be imagined once you had this in your world, started to shift. So for the BBC, as we move from wireless telegraphy carrying radio programmes through to television, which famously John Reith did not think was a good idea, and said to a small team, look, just go up to that hill in North London and fail, because then once you failed, I can then say we tried it, it was rubbish. So with the internet, that once we have a space within which the BBC can use this technology, we need to find ways to make it work for people. And that's a constant mission. And the fact that the BBC, for the last 50 years, has believed that making television programmes is the most effective way to deliver its public purposes does not mean that that will remain the case. And it can't be a mantra, it cannot be an axiom that the BBC makes television. It has to be an axiom that the BBC takes the best advantage of the communications technology of the day to make the world a better place. And specifically the UK, but broadly the world. And with that perspective, you can see why, for probably quite a long period of time, we will continue to make television programmes and radio programmes, and television will cost a lot of money because it does, and most of the money and most of the people will go there, and that will be fine. But other things matter too. So the context within which the BBC operates shifts over time, as it must. And the BBC, as an agent of change, shifts the environment within which it is. I had a conversation with some colleagues a few days ago, and they said, we're a catalyst for change. And I said no, because I did chemistry A-level. And I know that catalysts emerge from the process unchanged themselves. And if the BBC or any institution thinks it's a catalyst, then it is arrogant and does not deserve to succeed. You are a reagent. The BBC is changed by the process in the same way as society is changed. It has to be. Otherwise, I'd be wearing a dinner jacket when I go on air on the World Service every Tuesday night, and I would be speaking... Only at Christmas. Only at Christmas. And I would be speaking in remarkably clipped tones. Okay. So the world changes, the BBC changes the world, the BBC is changed by the world, and the thing the BBC is in people's lives shifts. And that's as it should be. That means that the BBC has, in addition to sort of overarching the rest of its mission, a responsibility to ensure that audiences, all audiences, the principle of universality, the BBC is for everyone, are capable of taking advantage of the things the BBC offers. So, you have to help people use the technology, take advantage of the services. Now, it just so happens that learning how to listen to the radio isn't that hard, you know, although it takes a bit of getting used to. It's not something which is innate. It is a learned behaviour. Let's not forget, nothing is innate apart from it. We will acquire language if we grow up in a language-using community. None of us will learn to read by ourselves. We all have to be taught it. None of us will accommodate with technology by ourselves. We all have to be taught it. Nothing in your evolutionary upbringing tells you that if you use your finger to move pictures under glass, you can make things happen. Nothing. Like, that's not. There are no digital natives. So the BBC has a responsibility to try to help people take advantage of the things it's doing. And of course, those things it's doing reflect broader societal, technological shifts, political shifts as well. Therefore, right from the start, this idea of what's now called media literacy has been important to the corporation. Indeed, back in the 2006 charter, the one that was just replaced, it was made an explicit duty of the BBC to promote media literacy. In other words, to help people understand the BBC's output and the output of everyone else. To help them, teach them how to read television, how to interpret what they were receiving, how to know whether the news sources that they were relying on were reliable. And in parenthesis, I would ask all of you to stop using the term fake news, because it is a weapon being used by those who many of us probably oppose, in the same way as the phrase political correctness was used as a way to turn common decency into something that was somehow deemed unacceptable. Every time we repeat the fake news model, we give legitimacy to an idea of how the media operate that will be used to undermine it. Yeah, a little bit of media literacy. The BBC has this responsibility. And Ofcom defines media literacy as the ability to access, understand, and create communications. Okay, so really, really broadly. In its 90-something year history, when the BBC has focused on media literacy, particularly in the last 40 years, it's thought about it in terms of digital literacy. I told you I didn't like the term digital, because what does that mean? What would it be to be digitally literate? Please send me answers on a postcard after this talk. Yeah. The ability to take advantage of what I call the affordances of technology is what I mean. And affordance is it's a word that's precisely defined in social science. It is a thing that something makes possible. So, the chair that Stephen is sitting on offers the affordance of sitting for him. But if he was a quadriplegic, it probably wouldn't, because he would have no way of taking advantage of it. Stairs offer the affordance of going up, or, if you're a Ghostbusters fan, going down, but only if you can take advantage of it. Digital technologies create new affordances. I can, with the shiny rectangle in my hand, type 10 numbers and talk directly to approximately 3.5 billion different people. Now that is a skill, a thing that is unprecedented in the history of humanity. More than half of the human population is directly accessible to me. That's never been, that's just unthinkable, that's magical, that's glorious. We think of it as being a bit of a pain because it's a smartphone, it doesn't work that well. But actually, it's an astonishing societal achievement. How do you take advantage of it? How do you use that affordance? What do you need to know about the world in order to feel comfortable making those calls? What do you need to know about the technology in order to feel comfortable using the various applications? Here's a very real question. Which of the many emerging secure messaging apps can you trust with your contacts data? Is it Threema? Is it Signal? Is it Wire? Do you really think WhatsApp has a fundamental flaw in its crypto? Or is that actually just a way in which it's managing to revalidate keys that could expose for a brief window of time some metadata? Is the fact that WhatsApp owned by Facebook a problem? Okay, that one we know the answer to. But there are other, harder questions that need to be asked by people. And so, within its mission, the BBC has taken very seriously what I've started calling, in a very deliberate way, a duty of care to the audience. So I'm mostly a journalist. One of the things that implies is that there are promises I will make to people like you for which I'm willing to go to jail rather than break them. So if you come to me with a great story about your employer and how evil they are, I don't know this man, I don't know his employer, this is not an attempt to suborn an honest member of GCHQ staff, but if you did come to me with such a story,
I run the business.
If you did come to me with such a story, and you said, this has to be, I have to stay confidential, and I promise you anonymity, then I'm basically saying to you, I will not tell under any circumstances, and I will go to jail rather than tell you. And not only am I telling you that, if I'm doing this for the BBC is telling you that, which means James Harding, our Director of News, is also agreeing to go to jail for my promise. And I actually asked him explicitly about this once. He said, yeah, that's part of what it is to be. That's what a journalist is. So the BBC has a duty of care to contributors, to sources, to people like that. The two-way nature of the internet, the way in which we engage with audiences because of this technology, means, I believe, that we also have a similar duty of care to our entire audience, which is everybody. And so when we think about what should the BBC be doing to help the audiences, it's part of that duty of care that they should be literate enough in the technologies that matter to them in their daily lives to be able to make informed choices. And so over the years, that has manifested itself in a number of different activities, many of which present as television programs, but come with additional added features and glosses. The one we talked about earlier, which David helped to produce, the computer literacy program, was a perfect model of how the BBC, when it takes something seriously, can transform reality, almost as effectively as the Republican Party, and with fewer people getting fired or humiliated. So far. So there's a series of television programs. Associated with that, there is the commissioning hardware, real hardware. You know, the BBC Micro was an amazing machine for its time. And I was lucky enough to work at Acorn later, but to get to know Sophie and Herman and the ARM team as they spun out and stuff like that. And later I'll tell you a story that I'm not going to tell you on camera. There are many. I wasn't in the Baron of Beef when Chris punched Clive, but a friend of mine was. And if you watch Micromen, there are scenes in that where I think, you know, I'm sure I was just off camera then, you know, because I've been in Cambridge a long time. The BBC did that, and then it also deployed the hardware, but also the whole ecosystem, the whole environment that inspired so many people and that made such a difference. It's continued to do that over the years. So as a journalist, I helped write for Computers Don't Bite. I don't know if people remember that particular campaign. Webwise, I was one of the founders of Webwise. In fact, for Computers Don't Bite, I wrote the Director General's introduction to the booklet. So yeah, it can now be revealed, 20 years later, that Greg Dyke didn't actually know anything about computing, but I did, and I could write in his voice. So there have been a number of campaigns. BBC Learning has done an enormous amount. Even things like GCSE Bite Size is important, because Bite Size, for those of you who I suspect maybe one person in this audience might have used it. Excellent, good Annie. The rest of you may have offspring or cousins, or you used it as well. You haven't aged well, have you? Or it's been around a lot longer than I thought. It's the beard, it's the beard. GCSE Bite Size is a resource for kids to learn and revise for their GCSEs, and they do it very well. The point is that the skills needed to use Bite Size, for which kids are incentivised, are also the skills they need to use on other websites. So by going through Bite Size, you also get better at doing the things you need to do on the internet. And by caring about user experience, by caring about design, by not building dark patterns into its output, the BBC helps to raise the bar. There's a current project running through the BBC called My BBC, which is about data gathering, sign-in, personalisation. And one of the arguments that we continue to have is that this needs to be done in a very open and transparent way, but the BBC needs to be the gold standard for how this is done. Because if the BBC does it well, it makes it harder for other people to do it badly. That's also the argument why BBC News was so important. BBC News made it hard to put out a shoddy news website. Obviously, eventually, one or two major publishers, who I'm not going to name because I'm being recorded, found their way around that. But, you know, you can't win them all. So the BBC tries to do the right thing and tries to broaden things out. And that's where, 3 years ago, the incentive for Make It Digital came. That Make It Digital is not something new, but it's the next step in an ongoing journey within the BBC to find ways in which to help audiences of all types to take advantage of the affordances that the network and digital technology offers in their lives, and also to reflect the changing importance of those systems in the wider society. So when gov.uk is the place where you go to renew your driving licence, renew your passport, stuff like that, people need these core skills in order to survive as citizens. And so the BBC takes very seriously its responsibility. When young people are faced with career choices that may or may not include STEM subjects, the BBC has a responsibility to help them understand what those subjects are, why they might be valuable, why they might influence their lives in 10, 20, 30 years. Not to make the decisions for them, but to put them in the frame of mind where they think about it. So one of the Make It Digital propositions is it's online, a careers quiz. It's a pop quiz, 10 questions. But what it takes you to is you're an explainer, you're an entrepreneur, low level. Here are some other people who would call themselves explainers or entrepreneurs, and because it's the BBC, we make short 3 to 4 minute videos with young people, early career, talking about how they made the choices in their life. So it's a very much a traditional BBC offering. It's a website that takes you to some videos, but it's designed from the ground up to help young people as they start to make these very difficult decisions. We have another thing called Weather Watchers. Are any of you here BBC Weather Watchers? No? Sign up, make me happy. Okay, Weather Watchers, given where this audience is basically Instagram without the porn. As in, it's a way of encouraging people who are less digitally confident to upload photos. And we do that by tying it into the weather, which apparently is a bit of a national obsession. Who knew? So the Weather Watchers site, you sign in, and you create an account or a BBC ID, and then you can upload a photo of the weather where you are with some information about temperature and other things. And they go onto a map, which is dynamically generated, but crucially, 2 or 3 photos every day are picked by the BBC weather team, and they're used as the background for the weather forecast. Oh yes. So if you're a weather watcher, your photograph might appear on BBC One in prime time, and that, strangely enough, is an enormous incentive. So people sign up for that. We've had over 1 million photos uploaded within a year. There's about 150,000 people signed up. It's not massive. But those are people who are not confident in the use of this technology, learning how to take a photo, get a photo onto their computer, or take a photo on their phone, upload it to a website, do those things. And that's a transferable skill. So we do things like that. We do other bits and pieces. The one that obviously you'll all have heard of is this one. This is called the BBC Microbit. Apparently I'm contractually obliged to say BBC Microbit. You don't have to. And this, of course, is a single board computer, and it's a beautiful thing. 2 years ago, this man showed me the prototype and said, look what we've got. And I tried to buy it from him, but he wouldn't sell. This is Alex. A team within BBC R&D, mostly, and BBC Learning, realised that there wasn't going to be another BBC Micro in the same way. And there were systems out there, Arduino-based systems, Raspberry Pi, whatever, that filled a really important niche in terms of entry-level computing. But there was scope for something else, which could be wearable, which was portable, and which has one of the most important factors, which is, and this to me goes to the heart of how the BBC thinks about things. Okay, suppose you gave every year 11 in the country a Raspberry Pi, Pi 3 or Pi 0, right, $5. Suppose you got that money out of the Education Secretary. I know it's unlikely, but just suppose. We're in fantasy world here. And they got them, they think they're great. And they took them home, even greater. And they said to their parents, carers, whatever, okay, so I need a keyboard, a monitor, a mouse, and an Ethernet cable, please. In a significant proportion of households, the answer to that is, what? Because they don't have those things. They don't have spare ones, they don't know what they are. If you have one of these, you take it to school, you create a program for it, you put the program on it, you take it home, you plug the batteries in, it's still useful. It will play Snake. It will do the thing you've told it to. It's useful even if this is the only computer in your house. Because the duty of care And the principle of universality that drives the BBC's thinking says we do stuff for everybody if we can. We don't leave people behind. We don't leave them out. And by doing it in this way and making it so open, so that work of great people like Neville, who's also going to stand up, who's doing amazing work with extender boards and things like that for the microbit, has something to build on, but in every household. Tell people just a little bit about what you're doing.
Oh, right, yeah, sorry. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, so I've been working with the microbit for about a year through Kiptronic, who are one of the BBC partner companies, and that's been one of the things about the microbit is the partner companies. So credit to Kiptronic for allowing me to get involved. So I've developed a range of boards that literally bolt onto the bottom of the microbit. I've developed a custom connector that allows that to happen. So it connects all the pads, not just the 5 main pads.
So that if you pass this round, for those of you who haven't played the board before, you can see at the bottom it's got all the connectors there.
So what I'm trying to do is make boards that are a bit like, I call it a bit like a combination of Meccano and Lego for the microbit. So giving children the blocks to work with, the hardware blocks. I'm an electronic engineer rather than a software engineer, so I'm interested in the electronic side of the microbit in particular, and it just gives them the opportunity, and then it's up to their imagination what they do with it.
Yeah, and we saw a whole load of them today in this very room, and they are so inspiring, because that's what it was designed to do. And the BBC and the partners you mentioned, and there are many of them, ARM, Samsung, TechMark, 31 different partners came together to make this thing happen. The microbit now is managed through something called the Microbit Foundation. Do you want to stand up and tell us a bit about the Microbit Foundation?
Certainly. So the Microbit Foundation is a not-for-profit organisation, and what we do is we're looking at the long-term future of the microbit. So the BBC started the great Make It Digital initiative and got the initial boards out there. We launched in October. And within about 2 weeks we had the website up, and we had a launch event, and we had a slightly new vision of the microbit out. We're selling them commercially. We've got a sponsorship program, so people can apply for our sponsorship program, and we donate microbits to good causes. Yeah. So we don't make profits, but the money that we do make, a very large percentage of that goes into our sponsorship program, and we're donating microbits, box loads of microbits into very good projects to try and inspire children to be inventors of the future.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So that's a way in which something which was corralled by the BBC but absolutely could not have happened without all the partners, this new model of partnership, ends up having an existence away from the BBC, because the BBC gets bored with things. Yeah, if it's not shiny and it's a year old, then let's move on to the next thing. And the real danger with microbit was it would be neglected. And by helping to create the foundation, and by getting such great support, particularly from ARM, it's now got a life independently of the BBC's interest in it, so it will be sustained. And that's a really good model. That's how it should be. Because although the BBC continues to be committed to digital literacy and digital creativity through Make It Digital, obviously there is this desire, the shark swimming through the water, to do something new, to come up with new ideas. And this year in the Make It Digital programme, we've got 5 or 6 really interesting projects. A citizen science aspect of weather watchers that might appeal to younger audiences, an idea about working with BBC research and development trainees and young apprentices to build an app that will then serve a major BBC campaign on Radio 1. There's all sorts of stuff there. But the capacity of the organisation, therefore, to keep going with the things that have already been successful becomes limited unless you add more and more people into the team. So it's really important to think creatively about how you transition stuff into the BBC acronym is BAU, business as usual. Anything new has to become a BAU or it will just die. Or we're really creative about it and we get it out of the door into a separate institution that will look after it and nurture it. And that's what we're trying to do as we keep moving forward to Make It Digital. My life within the BBC in this incarnation started with the archive, and it sort of finishes with the archive as well, because I've always thought that you could use the BBC's archive as a battering ram to get the organisation to think more carefully about what it wants to do next. But in order to do that, you have to surface the history in an accessible way. And was it 2 years ago you came to me with a crazy idea, David?
Yes.
Yeah, it was about that. So it turned out that David was the producer of the Computer Literacy Project, and there were a whole range of programmes. And many of them were in the BBC archives, some of them weren't. And there's also, how can I put this delicately? There are a number of people who have worked at the BBC in the past and remain obsessive. One of them is sitting in the front row, Mr. Steve Larritt, about how the BBC thinks about its past. And Steve and David and a couple of their friends, with support also from Alex, you can tell they've all turned up here today just to check what I'm going to say. They're not here because they want to listen. That's how careful they are. So had I read this? No. Had this thought that it would be possible to take all of that archive material and create a resource that would let anybody really understand just what the BBC had done at that time. That you could do something really quite special, because digitisation was getting cheaper and cheaper. Databases are well understood. With effort from a team of volunteers, you could index the programmes from the 1980s at a really granular level to allow researchers to explore it for academic purposes, but also members of the public to look and find, okay, where was Apple first talked about? What was said about Compaq? Where did we talk about programming? Also, the state of computer technology now means that although the programs themselves were made in an age of the BBC Micro, and the Micro is long discontinued and very few of us have them in our living rooms, very, very few people actually. Okay. Although those programs are long gone, you can emulate in software the BBC, the original Acorn operating system, and so you could actually run those programs. And Steve was assiduous enough to find and copy the original code base from the programs that were written. So what we've done is, over the last 18 months, as a slow sort of back office project without official sanction yet, we've created the Computer Literacy Archive Project, or CLAP. We really need a better name. And to the point where we have assembled all the programs. We've had them all reviewed by people who understand the subject matter and create the tags. We have created a system, an offline system that runs through an Excel database that will let you search and also play the programs. And the team and Yassam have created an online version as well. It's all very prototypey, but it is now moving to the point where we hope we can get it to be available for some purposes. It will definitely be important as a research tool inside the BBC and as an exemplar of how, if the BBC looks carefully at its past, it can get an idea about what it should do in the future. Because what the BBC needs to do over time is to shape the world in the public interest, is to continue with that mission of using the technology in the best way possible, to do what Lord Reith said, to bring the best of everything to everyone. That's what we are here for. You know, the Queen says we're here for that, we have to do it. We don't have a choice. It's fine. Right? It's written on vellum. It's got to be done. It's easy to forget the lessons of the past, or to forget just how great some of the things were. But if you bring them to the fore, if you bring them to the surface again, you can be inspired by them, and also they provide models for future action. So the Computer Literacy Project, in a sense, is a really good example of how the BBC can be pushed to remember well enough to do the right things going forward. The philosopher George Santayana famously said, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Well, I've always said that those who don't build a future have to live in someone else's. And if we work together with the BBC, we can build a future that we might actually want to live in, and one in which people are capable of getting the most out of this astonishing technology that many of us in this room have helped to create and continue to push forward. So Make It Digital is the current instantiation of that. It's the thing the BBC is currently doing. What I hope is it will continue to do even more innovative things in the years to come. Thank you. The last point is that we have a demo. We have the clap system available for people to look at, and Steve and Andy have kindly agreed to show it to you. So if you want the clap, it's over there.
Thank you very much indeed, Bill. That was a marvellous perspective on what's happening in this digital world. Here we are with EDSAC 1949 behind us, a reconstruction that's going on. It'll be switched on later in the year. The other end of the room, 1951, the world's oldest working original digital computer. And here, the HEC, 1950s, the first mass-produced British computer. I wonder what the people behind that will say when they hear your lecture.
So, I was lucky enough to know Maurice Wilks towards the end of his life. Maurice Wilks led the programme team, the team at Cambridge University that designed and built the EDSAC. And I asked him once what surprised him most about modern computers. And he said their reliability. He pointed to the machine on his desk and said, it's running millions of operations a second. And it doesn't break. EDSAC broke every hour. We're not surprised by symbolic processing. We're not surprised by that. That was all entirely predictable. Now, of course you could do that sort of stuff because you were representing the real world as bits, and once you could process enough of it fast enough, you could do anything. The reliability was what surprised him. So actually, if Maurice was here, he'd probably say, well, of course, just get on with it.
We do have representatives still alive associated with all these machines. I'm going to make sure they see this video.
Good.
Questions, please.
Or comments. Please feel free just to add your own perspectives or your own thoughts. You don't need to shape it into a question.
This is a genuine question, because I do know embarrassingly little about the microbit project.
Yeah.
Because I'm the wrong age group, it feels like. The thing about the BBC Micro project, because of programs that reached everybody had the chance to, even a techie nerd like me, through to normal people, could envelop themselves as they wanted in a half-an-hour week to get an idea of what it's all about safely. With the BBC, as you say, curating a nice space where you weren't going to be harmed.
Yeah.
Microbit is available, I'm sure, if I found the right bit on the internet to tell me about it. But I still feel an age that grew up 30 years ago, who loved the BBC Micro and inspired by those projects, has missed the opportunity, perhaps because we're Luddites and we don't understand the net enough, to discover the microbit as much as we discovered the BBC Micro.
That's a really good point. So the microbit isn't embedded in BBC editorial in the way the micro was. And there are two reasons for that. One is that it doesn't have to be, because the BBC now has other channels to reach the target audience, which is that age range. And the other is that the BBC is far more cautious about things like fair trading and all those sorts of things. And to privilege microbit in programmes and not talk about Raspberry Pi, Arduino, whatever, would no longer be considered acceptable. So you could, back in 82, 83, you could talk about the BBC Micro, and although Sinclair and other people complained, BBC just said, well, it's tough. These days, the atmosphere is very different, and therefore a different approach would have to be taken. That doesn't mean it couldn't or shouldn't be one of a range of physical computing devices that are featured, and I personally think that would be a good thing. I have been plotting how to get to the new editor of the Archers, because obviously if you get it on the Archers, then it reaches everyone. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. But it is a different world.
Because a TV programme is still a communal event.
Yes, yeah, sorry.
I think you should pick up your own point, that it complements the Arduino, it complements the Raspberry Pi, and therefore shouldn't be considered as competitive in that sense. And I think it could be promoted along with them, and therefore benefit everybody.
I agree entirely, and I would. So, what we're trying to do with the Make It Digital project, now that microbit is, if like, safely launched, we hope we can give more prominence to microbit and other devices in BBC editorial coverage, precisely because the issue of it being ours no longer applies. And so it should be possible to give a lift to the microbit and all the others, raise the water level for everyone to benefit them all.
I'd just like to sort of reflect on like the target audience of when the BBC went out. There's this film like Ian McDowell, Davis and Chris Searle, and then how we've got what's going on today, because when I found at the time when the BBC came out, I bought BBC Micro because I was doing my part-time degree at university.
Yeah.
I bought it maybe for number crunching, but then I watched Chris Searle and Ian McDowell, Davis talk about using word processors. Now, I'm using a typewriter at the time for my dissertations and stuff. And he said, get all the ideas out of your head, straight to the machine, tidy it up afterwards. And that changed my life, just that 10 seconds on the screen. But the thing was, it's this thing, I have a big thing about accessibility, like accessibility of music and all other stuff like that, is that me and a lot of colleagues bought those because we could then take control of our own personal development. We weren't dependent on our firm paying for a course somewhere, whatever. We took control over what we were doing.
Yeah.
I don't feel the same as the same out today, because I do a lot with Arduinos and other stuff. I'm a volunteer here. I see many people coming through here, and I don't feel the same thing out there today that I had for myself back 30 years ago. People see the microbit as something the kids wear as a trinket. Yeah. I feel a lot of adults are coming here in like their 30s or 40s. Feel they're being disenfranchised. So I had the BBC Micro thing. Yeah. The kids have got the microbit. There's lots of people coming here now, they've got maybe a tablet that does stuff, but they feel actually quite disengaged with the modern technology. Yeah. I just wonder whether there's some way you could modify your microbit system and what we put on TV to bring that out.
You see, so firstly, you're absolutely right. The point about the BBC Micro is you turned it on and you just got a little prompt and you had to do something, you had to make something happen. You turn on a Mac or a Windows machine and it's designed to keep you as far away from being creative with the system and to get you using the tools that the system provides instead. The microbit, Raspberry Pi, Arduino, all obviously do that in a slightly different way. Personally, I think, in fact, we've been much better. 5 years ago, we had the Spark, Mo McRoberts Spark idea. The thought was that the BBC, rather than making hardware, should provide a development environment similar to Scratch or something like that, but slightly more focused on the BBC's priorities, which would run on any hardware, but would open up the machine and encourage that sort of engagement. That idea didn't get any traction. It was a bit harder to sell. The microbit became the thing we did, and it does it very well. But I do think that you're right. But that issue is, in a sense, that's about the broader societal application of computers, that we have chosen to buy and to make computers that close down the programming possibilities unless you're special in some way or unless you have a particular interest, rather than have systems which invite that sort of engagement. The BBC alone can't change that. It could be part of a broader desire to open it up. And I think the BBC's support for the Maker movement, which is another aspect of Make It Digital, is a part of that. In the end, people need to make their own choices there. Yes, sorry, Helen wants to say something.
That said, there is an application available for tablets that can be used as a microbit programming environment.
Okay, so you can program a simulated microbit or on anything. So yeah, you're right. There are ways to do that. But your broader point that over the last 30 years, the computers we use every day have closed down is absolutely true.
Talking about this interesting point about the relative disenfranchisement of middle-aged would-be enthusiasts and the fact that in the days of the BBC Micro, those people felt included. There is a change in social context. In those days, we had no sense that anybody else had got there first. So we weren't, we felt like pioneers. I mean, we wouldn't, not necessarily designing the machines, but if you sat down at a computer and learned to program, there was a fair chance you're the only person in your town who knew how to program. Now a middle-aged person is aware that other people already do it a lot better than they're going to be able to do it to start with, which gives them a chilling effect. So I think there's a different threshold to get over. The fact that people maybe have an identity as a learner which leads them to suspect that they're not good at that kind of thing, never being good at numbers. And that didn't apply so much, I think.
That's.
I think part of the problem we have at the moment is we have consumer devices for buying things. Let's call them tablets. We have phones we can now carry around without wires attached. And they're all clever. Most of the devices now, even our Hoovers are clever, our thermostats are clever. But until you understand enough about behind the scenes how it works, you can be given crap and you can't say, sorry, I know this could be better than this.
Yeah. I'll come to Neville.
Yeah, I mean, related to that, I mean, what I'd quite like to see is a half-hour programme every week, at the same time every week, maybe on Children's BBC, call it Coding Weekly or something like that, where you actually go through the details of the Python programme to do something. I mean, a good example was on the live lesson they did the sorting algorithm with dancers. Brilliant way of showing how sorting algorithms work. I'd like then that to be mapped to how you code that in Python or JavaScript or another language like that. You know, you're not going to get 10 million viewers for that.
Well,
But
so
the viewers you do get will be absolutely fascinating.
Okay, seriously, if you want to see that sort of thing, then let the BBC know you want to see that sort of thing. Because that sort of feedback does get listened to, and it does get responded to. So, you know, you can just, yeah, there are more.
If it's on the BBC,
it's on regular
address it to.
Well, you basically, so,
I will say CBBC have extended their hours of broadcasting. They
Really?
stop at 9 o'clock now.
Right.
yeah.
In my opinion, an evening show like that would be perfect.
And if it's on regular broadcast television, you might get parents sitting down with the children, so the parents actually understand
Yeah.
how to code.
Good point. Okay, so
sorting
the
algorithm.
fastest way to get the BBC to listen to you is to complain. So you don't ask for something, you complain it's not there. So you go to bbc.co.uk/complaints, you send anything, you say, I am disgusted at Tunbridge Wells, I cannot believe the BBC doesn't have... And then somebody will have to reply to you. So somebody will then have to ask the people in the relevant editorial department, why don't we do this? Right? And enough people do that, editorial think, maybe there's demand for it. Okay? So when this appears on the web, sorry, complaints people, editorial complaints, I know you're my friends, I walk past you every day, I really apologise. But they asked. Got to respond to the audience. Yes?
Still, right. One of the perspectives that I'm quite interested in your opinions on are, so I started to learn with some home computers like the BBC Micro, and if you look at the computers that we get today, you know, they look a bit like the BBC Micro, they've got a keyboard, they've got a screen. We're now giving children a BBC Microbit, and what do you think they would invent with that? So I invented computers based on the BBC Micro. What will the computers of the future look like? Having given children the BBC Microbit, do you think?
Well, so the BBC Microbit, as you know, we know basically what they do is they'll plug it into some of the boards that Neville's providing. They'll use it as the basis for Internet of Things. They'll hack their home, their parents' home system so they can control the thermostats and the lights and get the hue lights to change colour unexpectedly. They will hack with the system and use them as controllers. There was an episode of oh God, not Halt and Catch Fire, the other one about the hacker. Amazon Prime series about seriously disturbed hacker.
Oh yeah.
Mr. Robot, episode of Mr. Robot.
And
Okay.
iBoy.
I'm sorry?
iBoy, the new Netflix
iBoy.
show.
That's, yes, but I'm thinking about Mr. Robot, where he uses a Raspberry Pi to infiltrate the company. Well, it'll be a microbit when it's on BBC One. Yeah. So, you know, at some point, those sort of things. So what they will, again, this time physical computing, it's really odd little portmanteau, accurately describes it. It's a machine, it's vanished, can have it back later. It's a machine that you can entirely control and understand. And it opens up the possibility. So our best hope is that the people who write the ethics policy for the next generation of Internet of Things devices will have used microbits, realised how powerful they are, and do something sensible before the cataclysm. So I think it would unleash just as much creativity, but in a world of connected devices, something like that is actually far more useful to you than anything with a keyboard.
I think another aspect that I think I like to see with this kind of computing education is, I mean, like myself, I got Killer App word processor, which was brilliant for me.
Yeah.
That took me on to a whole lot of other stuff. It's why would someone need to know about this stuff? And I'll give you an example, because I was in a well-known stall that's in central Milton Keynes, and a guy from the company rep was trying to flog me a printer that would assess what my printing habits were. I'd take out a regular subscription to them, and they send me ink.
Yeah.
So I said at Scooby, a side point with that is you've got thousands of people's activity-based costume data. I can't basically compete against your information on the users. I'm not going to sit there every week with a spreadsheet working out my optimum contract to go on. Thirdly, I've got a processor sitting inside my firewall, communicating back to your company, which I've got no control over.
Yeah.
And you think, all these cameras, all these security cameras have got hacked.
I know. Okay, so you've just answered your own question.
Yeah, but I understand that stuff. But a lot of people outside the room do not understand that stuff. They'll blindly buy this stuff, not really realising what it's a bad buy. Yeah. That's where I'm coming from. I'm lucky, I understand this stuff, but I know lots of people who do not know that stuff.
Exactly, but you have just answered your own question. That's why everybody needs to know about this.
Yeah.
That's why we need to teach them it.
Yes.
Just suppose that Donald Trump, instead of putting it's like Voldemort, you have to say his name.
Did he take his power away?
No, but apparently one of the Horcruxes is in Steve Bannon. I'm in so much trouble. Suppose that instead of signing an executive order, Donald Trump has instead said to Border and Customs, okay, what I want you to do is to tweak the software in the automated passport gates so that anyone with a slightly dark complexion gets pulled away for secondary screening. Okay, I just want you to, that's it. Don't tell anyone to do it, just do it. Okay? Looks random. You know, can't get through, come over here. Oh, sorry, actually come over here, sir, I'm Adam. Nobody would notice. Effect would be the same. Those people come in, where are you from? I'm from Somalia, sorry, you're going home. And he would have got away with it. That's why we need to know. Because those systems shape our lives.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that what you've said has kind of changed my perception about what the BBC is doing in some ways. I kind of had this sense that like the government digital service had kind of pulled back to focusing on kind of core things, that perhaps the BBC had done that as well, and that's where things like kind of bite size had disappeared. But I think there's kind of a little danger in things like the Weather Watchers, which to me has always just appeared to be about kind of crowdsourcing content in the same way as news is about like putting people's tweets up as soon as you can get them to get the story out there. And I didn't realise that there was this kind of educational
behind it,
and I think that there's a danger of that being lost on people.
Yeah, there is. We could probably do more to tell the story. Our view with Weather Watchers is, by not making a fuss about it, you're just going to be able to sign up because they enjoy it. They don't notice that they're acquiring this skill. They're more likely to go along with it. With some areas, you may need to do more about it. But I think I will take back what you just said about not realising that it was also grounded in a bigger vision. So I think there's probably more we could do about making that visible. So thank you for that point.
Did all Year 11s get a microbit this year, or did it fail?
Yes, no. All the Year 11s in schools that had signed up.
Yeah, they had to sign up.
Yeah, they had to sign up in advance. They are now commercially available, so you can buy them and you can get them at a discount. And the Microbit Foundation
You could buy them here in the shop.
And you can buy them here in the shop. Please exit through the gift shop.
And will it roll on until next year?
No, there won't be another giveaway.
No.
So you can probably, tell me if I get this wrong. So the Microbit Foundation has a number of founding partners, including the BBC Samsung arm. The BBC has a director on the board of the Microbit Foundation, and one of the things the BBC brings to the party is a desire that, if profits allow, then consideration should be given to more free microbits to UK schools, because that's our mission. But we are one board member of several, so the BBC does not shape the policy of the foundation. That's something we would be in favour of if the others can do it and if there's the money. So it's not that it's ruled out, it's not likely to happen. What we hope is that, for example, there are various funding proposals. There is funds available for various technology initiatives in schools, and I know that some of those applications have included provision of microbits. So it's becoming seen as a desirable device. We deliberately, all the partners deliberately, the microbits were given to children individually. It's not the school's microbit, it's yours, with some extras for class. So each child owns their microbit, and it's up to them what to do with it. If schools want to build them into the curriculum for year 11, whatever, they can then make provision out of their budget to acquire the number they need. So we wanted to kickstart the whole thing and generate some excitement, and the delivery was successful. It did go smoothly. So yes.
It was delayed, though, wasn't it?
It was delayed because it's hardware, and you need to really make sure it works. So they didn't go out until later than we planned, but from what we understand, certainly from the number of hits on the website, the number of millions of lines of code that are being compiled, and the use in various places, and the presence of things like BED, it is successful. It really is. The other thing is, now let me get this number right. Thing we're most proud of. Is it in this? Yeah, okay. So, if you ask girls, 23% of girls who have not used a microbit say they might study computing. 39% of girls who had used a microbit said they would study computing. So, a real shift in the feelings that young women have about whether this is a path that's open to them. And I think that's really, that's something we're proud of. Okay.
Further questions?
Just a small point. I run a small education technology consultancy, helping schools implement technology. And the BBC Microbit has made that whole thing so much easier, and the uptake has been, seeing it on the ground has been, so Raspberry Pi, Arduinos, etc. all have their place certainly.
Yeah.
That's had a big impact.
Well, that's good to know. I say we do hope. We want to raise all the boats. This is absolutely not a competitive field. So that's good to hear. Thank you. It's nice.
Thank you very much, Bill. I think I saw the future of computing today in this room. Lots of kids playing with microbits, and one little girl whose eyes didn't reach the top of the tin, avidly using her BBC microbit in one of the apps. It was a lovely sight.
That's great. Good.
Thank you very much indeed, Bill.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you. You guys want to, if anybody has time, there's a chance to look at the CLAP.
Do you want to tell that story while he switches the camera off?
Which one was that?
The arm story.